Okay, we go to you, Alex.
Okay, so wait, let me share screen. All right, so the big news of the day is this here. Actually, kind of interesting after we did that whole thing about, Russian interest in their near abroad. This happened today, which is,
Wow.
heavy unrest in the possibility, even though the Russian military may be, or certainly Russian allied forces. So, well, intervening. I mean, again, Kazakhstan is one of those many, very corrupt post-Soviet countries led by an authoritarian ruler. So I can, I'm sure there are plenty of issues for people to have against their government there. But yeah, so I guess, yeah, that probably is the CSTO that we were talking about yesterday. Those that form or that formal, well, semi-alliance will be again. So yeah, so maybe the Uzbeks, the from Kyrgyzstan, the other stan. Let's see, what's the others? Turkmenistan they're probably all, and the Russians. In fact, I think the Russians have some small forces in Kazakhstan, as they, of course, did when it was the Soviet Union. So this is actually, I have a clip from Al Jazeera that talks about the unrest and what's going on. So let's play that, and then we can discuss.
And be sure to go full screen.
Yeah, it's full screen.
And audio.
Scenes like these are rare in Kazakhstan. Protests have erupted in several cities as outrage over an increase in fuel prices have spread across the country. Violent clashes have followed, particularly in the largest city, Almaty, with reports of a fire and gunshots heard near the mayor's office when demonstrators tried to storm the building earlier in the week.
Alex, the sound.
It's not coming through?
It's muffled.
Oh, okay, I'll up the volume.
Not up the volume. Just do more.
Oh, okay. Share computer sound. Okay.
For government accountability.
That better?
Much better.
Quickly took a political angle where people started calling for free elections of local officials, started calling for the ouster of top officials in the government. So they're working to get this kind of under control as much as they can. This is going to hurt the reputation of the Kazakh government. Kazakhstan has always been fairly stable.
Whoa.
The cost of liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, which is widely used as car fuel, more than doubled to 28 cents a liter when the government lifted price caps. But amid political pressure, the government of the oil-rich country said the price would go back to 11 cents a liter in Mangistau in the west and in other provinces. Faced with a minimum wage of less than $100 a month, protesters say the increase is unacceptable. Kazakhstan's president sacked his cabinet and appointed a new acting prime minister. Now he's calling for the unrest to stop.
Calls to attack civilian and military officers are completely illegal. It is a crime and that will be punished. Power will not fall. What we need is not conflict, but mutual trust and dialogue.
The government has argued LPG subsidies are unsustainable in the long term. But its plan to phase out price caps over 3 years is being fiercely resisted. The Central Asian country, long known in the region for its political stability, now faces widespread unrest. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
Joining us now from Kiev is Peter Zalmayev, Executive Director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Peter Zalmayev, welcome to the News Hour. There was trouble in exactly this area a decade ago. That was really messy then. Do you see something similar heading our way now?
In fact, yes, you're right. The city of Janos then a new sort of violence that Kazakhstan had never known in its post-Soviet independent history. Exactly 11 years ago, over 16 people died in that city in similar protests. What is different this time is that the protests then, they were confined to the western oil-producing part of the country. They have now this time spread to the rest of the country. They have engulfed the main city of Kazakhstan, Almaty, and the capital city, Nur Nur-Sultan, named after the de facto ruler of Kazakhstan, Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev, who remains the de facto main political actor in Kazakhstan. So what we're seeing now, the formal, the formal excuse for the protest is the lifting of the cap on liquefied petroleum gas in a country where, as your reporter mentioned, salaries are pretty modest by world standards. On the other hand, we are seeing increasingly political demands being added to the protesters, to the point there where their main demand, or one of their main demand, is for the ouster of the government, which has in fact happened, does not satisfy them any longer. So this is a very, very scary situation. It's threatening to spiral out of control, and then one may wonder what the government may be forced to do, may be forced to call on Vladimir Putin to help and step in. That is a big question.
That sounds as if it's got the makings of being a situation that is not only dangerous for the country, but dangerous for the wider region. Because if the Russians walk in, the chances of the Russians walking out must be pretty slim, especially in the short term, at least.
As someone, as you mentioned, I'm sitting and based in Kiev in Ukraine. I know better than many people that indeed, when Vladimir Putin moves in, it is so far there's no precedent for him to be moving out. You look at Moldova, you look at Georgia, you look at the eastern Ukraine, and there's clearly more than enough precedent in Kazakhstan for that to happen. The entire northern part of Kazakhstan is a largely Russian-speaking and ethnic Russian population. Vladimir Putin has in the past hinted that he does not view Kazakhstan as a viable sovereign nation. In fact, one time saying that, Kazakhstan does not have much experience in sovereignty, in nation building. That has sent shudders through the spines of the political establishment for a potential, let's say, scenario whereby Russia moves in and creates some kind of a people's republic in northern Kazakhstan, the way they did in Ukraine. And you mentioned the geopolitical situation. You have to keep in mind China, that is also sitting right next to Kazakhstan. It is very wary about what is happening across the border because it has its interests. It has its billions of dollars invested in Kazakhstan, and it receives gas from Kazakhstan as well.
Peter, just to get your thoughts on three aspects or three areas of discussion that we're getting as you're talking to us now. We're getting reports that the Kazakh president has been saying he would act as tough as possible. He's also saying he will stay in the capital. He is also saying he takes over as the chairman of the Security Council. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's in fact, the chairman of the Security Council is former President Nazarbayev. It looks like now there's decision made at the very top that there's need for very, very strong action so far, and there is precedent for that in the region. In the neighboring Uzbekistan in 2005, there was an uprising in Andijan. It was quelled at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dead, and so I think the government is now smelling real trouble. Tokayev signed the decree ousting the government. That has not placated the protesters, which means that they're calculating that they will be making a very, very drastic decision. It may involve live ammunition against the protesters, and God knows where it will lead.
Very, very briefly, Peter, we're almost out of time, please. Would he have done that, those three things that we're now discussing, would he do that unless he thought it would be green-lit by the Kremlin if he was to ask the Kremlin, do you think this is a good idea?
I think he's pretty much has the backing of the Kremlin. The Kremlin has always backed using force against peaceful protesters.
Okay, we must leave it there. Peter, good to get your thoughts on this developing story. Peter Zalmayev there talking to us from Kiev.
Okay, so to add to what they were saying, I think there's any scenario by which the Russians would allow an anti-Russian government to come to power in Kazakhstan. So they will, if they have to, they will intervene. And as that guy said, maybe in Putin's interest to have, get some troops into the Russian-speaking parts of Kazakhstan, or even to, maybe try and semi-detach them and bring them into Russia proper to, expand their territory. Oh, we lost Mike. Okay. Ken or Steve, any of you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to get a rundown from Steve on the political orientation of all these stands, all of these countries separate from Russia, underneath Russia, because they're mostly becoming industrialized because of their resources. And as you see when you travel around the world, the standard is Western, skyscrapers and freeways and ATMs and cell phones, as opposed to the Kremlin's, ice cream cone buildings, or even Italy's cathedrals. It's even mosques. I don't know. It's all kind of modern New York, Chicago, LA, downtown financial districts. So it seems like these new countries, when they get involved in international commerce, they pick up, Western standards. Like Dubai is the best example. But I'm guessing Steve knows the most.
Yeah, and Steve, you got to unmute too.
Yeah, Steve, unmute. Yeah. Let's hear from Steve on this. I'm done jabbing.
I'm not sure unmute is going to do the program very much good because I don't know very much about this region. I really don't know very much about this region at all. I'd like to make a comment though on the language situation in Kazakhstan. It's very interesting because obviously there's at least one, if not more, languages for the Kazakh people. I mean, like in Afghanistan, there are 40 different languages. But then you saw these buildings with very large signs in Russian. And then you saw the police with shields with the word police in English. So I mean, this may be entirely coincidental. I have no idea, what this meaning is. I have to say that I did not know that there's a northern strip of Kazakhstan which is occupied by Russians, and of course that was part of Stalin's policy during the days of the Soviet Union, to try to get Russians out to those countries which really had been independent countries which became part of Russia during the period of the Russian Empire. And then in the Soviet Union, they had very significant powers delegated to them. They became constituent republics. There were 16 constituent republics. These are major constituent republics. I think they each had their own communist party, but really beyond that, I am not terribly well informed about the region. I'll say one thing that a long time ago, I went out with a lady who's no, actually I shouldn't mention her name, but she had a name. Her first husband was a cousin of Lazar Kaganovich, who was the chief Jew in the Soviet cabinet under Stalin. So, oh yeah. Speaking of odd mentions of Jewish people, you probably seen, if you haven't seen it, you've heard this incredible interview that Ari Melber had with Navarro, where Navarro revealed.
Meaning Peter Navarro?
Peter Navarro, yeah. Where he revealed the whole plot. Saying that, of course, the election was stolen, and all they wanted to do was set things right. But in the course of, he's not a very bright guy. In the course of doing that, he revealed the whole plot, and in going through the forces that intervened in the elections, he just happened to mention that George Soros played a hand in fixing the vote in, I think it was Arizona. So it's just, I mean, it's anti-Semitism is de rigueur with some of these guys. It really is. I mean, I'm sure he didn't even think, what am I saying? He just mentioned George Soros, right. And of course, he's symbolic.
Yeah, well, he's a globalist, right?
Yeah, but he's also Jewish. I mean,
Yeah. Well, no, again, globalism is one of
well,
those
globalism, of course.
hidden words that they secretly were used to refer to Jews. They're the global. When they talk about evil globalists, that's who they really mean.
I mean,
I
think I may have mentioned
the Rothschilds are controlling everything.
Talking about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which project to the globalist view. It happens that my father, Professor Harold J. Janos, did the bulk of the research for the first book that proved that the protocols are a forgery, and it was published under the name of a Gentile for political reasons by Columbia University Press in 1941. So anyway, I'll say, since we I don't know how.
Before the war started, I assume that would have been before December 7th, right?
It was before December 7th, yes.
Well,
actually, one of the most beautiful synagogues I've ever been in is the Doheny Street Synagogue in Budapest, which was, of course, destroyed by the Nazis and then completely restored by George Soros after the war.
You're muted, Ken.
Yeah. George Soros spent his money on a temple. That's good. So, how about you, Alex? You familiar with these stands?
Somewhat. In general. I mean, I haven't looked into them too recently. I know general. Again, they tend to be led by corrupt oligarch families. They're very unequal. They're very dependent on, of course, natural resources in most cases. They do have a lot of, especially natural gas there. Kazakhstan is up there to the north. You can see. Scroll up, Ken, so we can see the capital. Well, see Almaty, which is the important city in the cap. Yeah. So those are the important.
Well, that's Kazakhstan is right up against. I'm talking about all of these guys.
Right, and you can see again how it stretches across to the Caspian Sea. It's a lot of territory. I mean, again, like as they said, it's next to China, so China may have some role in terms of future development. They're definitely running Belt and Road initiative, high-speed rail pipelines and the like through Kazakhstan, the Chinese.
And it's
so they also have an interest in maintaining a stable pro-Chinese government for trade purposes, yeah.
So from the viewpoint of an average citizen, it's not a place you go for vacation. You haven't seen any movies about it. You don't read any novels about it.
Except Borat, which is of course a parody.
But Borat, no. That was in
No, it was Kazakh because he was making fun of Kazakhstan.
Okay, Kazakhstan. So but it has.
In fact, I think it's banned. I think it's still banned in Kazakhstan, and he was denounced by, of course, as an evil Jew who was, defaming the good name of the country, etc.
Yeah, well, he was proud to do that. Yeah, but in any event, I'm just saying we don't know anything about it. It's like it's devoid in our history. That's something we really don't cover. Don't know anything about
all those Central Asian.
Yeah, well, you don't know anything about the history of it. It's sort of like if you let me speak for a moment. If you go to Bollywood, you will see historic movies about the history of India and big battles and kings and all kind of history. The kind of history we grew up with Charlemagne and all the stuff happening in Europe.
Well, I forget if it's either Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan. That they put out a movie about the life of Genghis Khan in the mid-2000s. That was not bad, again, because of obviously their connection to history. I think that might have been Turkmenistan, but again, so obviously there.
So
Genghis Khan went through that area and fought. There was a big empire that he around Karakorum that basically he completely destroyed, burned cities to the ground, because he said Genghis Khan sent them some envoys and they killed the envoys, and the Mongol response to that was basically, "You are dead." Literally, they would retaliate with extreme violence, and so they burned cities to the ground You know,
Yeah,
that
but-
was the beginning of their conquest of Central Asia.
But I mean, this
or
is a-
12 whatever it would have been.
This is a big part of the world that,
Yeah.
if it didn't in the past, will in the future have because of its resources and unknown, mysterious,
and geographical
precious metals. Yeah,
and
look
geographic
where it is.
location too. You know.
Yeah, China, Russia, Iran, the Middle East.
Right.
By the way,
If
just
you
as a-
read, Ken, have you ever read Mackinder?
no,
You know, that World Island stuff. Yeah, that's what you know.
I
He
don't-
controls Eurasia, controls the world.
Yeah,
That theory, you know.
but just as a
Geopolitical stuff too.
personal note here, just as a personal note, see all these yellow dots?
That's where you've been.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's all from Google. So
You
they
and
got
your-
these yellow dots. Shows that's about
So
where
what
I
are the
am.
green dots? Where you want to go?
No, I don't know. That's where there's a gas station or something. I don't know. You know, but these are, you know, places I stayed or something. Oh, this was an incredible place in China called the 798 Art Zone. It's in a gigantic industrial park that was converted to galleries. And it goes on. It's got to be like 10 square miles or something. Very advanced art, like, you know, not just little Chinese dolls, but, you know, all kinds of artists. But anyhow, just as a curiosity. So here's all of these countries. This has got to be very significant for the
And it is,
future of
yeah.
Russia.
And Ken, it is the CSTO that's being invoked
Right.
to talk about intervening. And actually, the interesting thing is the current head of it is the Prime Minister of Armenia, and he's the one who's saying, "Oh, they will send peacekeeping troops for a limited time period only, until order is restored, and to help quote Kazakhstan overcome this terrorist threat." Oh, they're saying, this is the Kazakh president. He's saying, okay, these are international terrorists who are doing this, not, you know, Kazakh citizens who are pissed off about their gas prices being raised.
Right. So does anybody know what the form of government is in these principalities? Is it communist? Is it
no, I mean, they have
democratic?
elections, but they're you know,
Dictatorships.
they're tightly controlled elections, you
So
know.
they're tribal. They're tribal, basically.
No, there's usually a strong man family who dictate who stays in charge.
That's what I mean. Tribal.
And, yeah.
There's tribal. You know, I'm
well-
the king because I killed everybody else. You know.
I mean, but they're not necessarily connected. These families are often, you know, their power comes from their position in the old Soviet Union, and they held on to that. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Again, it's Nazarbayev, Nur Sultan Nazarbayev, who's the big power. He used to be president. He stepped down in 2019, but he runs things from behind the scenes.
Now, Azerbaijan has got to be very involved because it's so close to Tehran and Iraq and Turkey. So Azerbaijan is in a lot of politics, right?
I don't know about on this, but yeah, I mean, they're fellow Muslim countries, among other things.
There's Armenia and here's Azerbaijan.
And of course, the Turks have interest with their whole, you know, Erdogan's whole pan-Turkish thing, where he sees this greater Turkey that could be built out of some Central Asia that he's been dreaming, you know, neo-Ottoman dreams essentially that he has. So, I mean, I don't know about what forces he or what support he gives to the Kazakh government, but
So
you know,
let's
he's
throw
involved too.
Let's throw
But
the
Jim
ball.
could probably say more. I think
Okay, Alex, let's throw the ball over to Mike. We've all been trying to fumble with this ball. What can you tell us about these?
Kazakhstan, Mike.
All these countries, any of them, Mike?
Oh no, Mike got knocked off, Ken.
No,
Unless he's waiting. Check if he's waiting.
He was waiting for me to admit him. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so bring him back, and then you can.
Then I'll hit him in the head with this.
But Dennis, while we're waiting for Mike, Dennis, if you want to unmute and
Let's ask him to unmute. Dennis, there's Mike, and I got to admit Mike again. No, he's in. He's in. Ask him. To
Mike.
unmute.
So Mike, while you were away, we've been talking about again the unrest in Kazakhstan.
What is it you want?
Just anything you know about the Kazakhstan or thoughts in general on the post-Soviet. Yeah.
Well, they went through tremendous industrialization under the Soviet rule, and became I mean, those countries became very, very well educated people.
Right. Yeah, I was
And
reading. I
in
think
other words,
yeah.
what I wanted to say was I just heard a conversation about what happened when the end of the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union did a lot of good for a lot of countries, actually, and losing it was a big loss. Basically, that's what I think.
Right.
And
Well, actually, to add to what you were saying, Dennis, about the literacy, on the Socialist Forum, they were talking about. I think it might have been Kazakhstan. They talked about one of the stands. You know, before the Russian Revolution, the literacy rate was around 2%, according to some accounts. But by the end of the Soviet period, well, at a certain point in the 60s, they per capita they were sending more people to university than France was. So they had a higher level of education than parts of Western Europe.
Right.
Because of how important education was pushed in the Soviet Union, including higher education. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually know Jews in New York and New Jersey who came from
really?
one of
Huh.
and they're very highly educated.
Right.
And I mean, I'm why they prefer the United States. I'm not sure, but
Right.
they didn't have a bad life in where they were coming from. That's
Okay.
all I know.
Yeah. So,
Well,
Mike,
there was a Jewish settlement established in one of the stands. I don't know which it was. But
yeah.
in the 1930s, Stalin wanted to provide Jews with another place to go besides Palestine.
And the Pale Settlement, remember those was the Pale Settlement, right?
The Pale Settlement, yeah. And but I don't remember which stand it's in, but there were a significant number of Jews who survived the Holocaust because they were either sent to or moved to
That's correct.
Right.
You remember the name of the Dennis?
Historically, there was that one state that was converted to Judaism in Central Asia in the Middle Ages?
Yeah, it was. It was
the Kazakh, right? The Kazakh people, wasn't it? Was it? I forget who it was.
It was one of those countries. Yes, that's correct.
Right, because they're part of the story of how the Russians chose, the Orthodox Church, because they were one of the religions the Russians, sent envoys to figure out, okay, which one should we choose around, 900 AD.
Hey, Alex, what do you think? Should we move on?
Yeah, unless, Mike comes back.
Well, when he comes back, we'll come back.
Yeah, we can.
I might have knocked him off by mistake because he came on twice.
Let him back in. Okay.
He's mad at us now. We'll see what happens. Okay, so what do you want to move on to? Go ahead.
Al, I found this. Ted Roll is always good for a laugh, so I thought we could highlight his cartoon today, which makes a point about what they call Blue Anon. Again, the Democrat conspiracy theory. Again, all these Democrats talking about Trump's big lie, but then forgetting they have their own big lie, which is, of course, Russiagate. So, again, the obvious contrast between, and again, that ridiculous thing about Hillary Clinton doing her TED Talk, whatever it was, her master class, where she reads her 2016 acceptance speech, which is, really sad that, but, I think a kind of pathology. But it's also important because some people are talking about how she should run in 2024, which I think would be a complete, if you want to just hand the election to Trump, let's do that. But, okay, to move on to some actual news, okay, I thought we could, this is good from Michael Hudson. Did you guys know we had a financial crisis in 2019 that was hidden from us? And the Federal Reserve actually broke the law to hide it.
Okay, go full screen and put the sound through.
So this is Michael Hudson on Moderate Rebels, Naomi. So we'll talk about, again, this economic crisis that that was the real crisis before COVID, and they used COVID to cover it up. That it never happened, but here we go.
Finance, insurance, and real estate. So today we'll talk about the rising rates of inflation and what corporate media outlets are missing about the story. But before we begin talking about that, Professor Hudson, another reason I wanted to have you today is to talk about a big story that went viral. It was just published today. And in fact, it's on the website Wall Street Parade, and it went so viral that the website actually went down because it was being shared so much. But this is an article just published at wallstreetonparade.com. I have it up in the archive just because the website's down. And the article is titled, "There's a news blackout on the Fed's naming of the banks that got its emergency repo loans. Some journalists appear to be under gag orders." And this is by Pam Martins and Russ Martins, published on January 3rd. I'll just briefly summarize the main point, and then I want to get your response, because I think this is obviously part of the discussion around the inflation crisis. So the Federal Reserve released the names of the banks that had received 4.5 trillion, that is trillion with the T, in cumulative loans in the last quarter of 2019 under its emergency repo loan operations for a liquidity crisis that has yet to be credibly explained. So Professor Hudson, I'll ask you in a second to explain what that liquidity crisis was. And they point out that among the borrowers that received, again, $4.5 trillion in loans from the Fed were JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup, three of the Wall Street banks that were at the center of the subprime and derivatives crisis in 2008 that brought down the U.S. economy. That's blockbuster news. But as of this morning, not one major business media outlet has reported on the details of the Fed's big reveal. And they suspect that's why there are some journalists under gag orders. And then the other point to add here is that this borrowing was happening in September 2019, and it was actually before the first case of COVID was identified in the United States. They point out that the first COVID case was reported in the U.S. in January, and then the World Health Organization declared its pandemic in March 2020. So this massive borrowing spree of $4.5 trillion was happening in September. So there's a few things you can respond to, Professor Hudson. Maybe we can start with, why was the Fed giving trillions of dollars to these large Wall Street banks? And why was there a liquidity crisis that's unexplained? Why did the Fed refuse to release the names of these banks? And was there a financial crisis before COVID that the U.S. government later was able to blame on COVID, but it was actually a financial crisis in the making, it seems like?
There was actually no liquidity crisis whatsoever. And Pam Martins is very clear about that. She points out the reason that the regular newspapers won't report it is the loans violated element of the Dodd-Frank laws that were supposed to prevent the Fed from making loans to particular banks that were not part of a liquidity crisis. In her article, she makes very clear by pointing out these three banks, Chase Manhattan, Goldman Sachs, that used to be a brokerage firm, and Citibank, that the Federal Reserve laws and the Dodd-Frank Act explicitly prevent the Fed from making loans to particular banks. It can only make loans if there's a general liquidity crisis, and we know that there wasn't at that time because she listed the banks that borrowed money, and there were very few of them. There were the big three that she mentions. There was also Nomura that got 1/3 of the loans in that quarter that were taken out. I think there were, on balance, the repo loans were like 28 billion, and Nomura got 10 billion of them. Cantor Fitzgerald was also in there. Well, what happened apparently was that while the Dodd-Frank Act was being rewritten by the Congress, Janet Yellen changed the wording around, and she said, "Well, how do we define a general liquidity crisis? Well, it doesn't mean what you and I mean by a liquidity crisis, meaning the whole economy is illiquid." She said, if 5 banks need to borrow, then it's a general liquidity crisis. Well, the problem, as she points out, is it's the same 3 big banks again and again and again and again, and these are not short-term loans. She points out that they were 14-day loans, they were longer loans, and they were rolled over, not overnight loans, not day-to-day loans, but not even week-to-week loans, but month after month, the Fed was pumping money into JP Morgan and Citibank and Goldman. But then she points out that, or at least she told me, that these really weren't Citibank and Chase and Morgan. It was to their trading affiliates. Now, this is exactly what Dodd-Frank was supposed to prevent. Dodd-Frank was supposed to protect the depository institutions by trying to go a little bit to restore the Glass-Steagall Act that Clinton and the Obama thugs that came into the Obama administration all got rid of. It was supposed to say, okay, we're not going to let banks having their trading facilities, the gambling facilities on derivatives and other, just playing bets on the financial markets. We're not supposed to help the banks out of these problems at all. So I think the reason that the newspapers are going quiet on this is the Fed broke the law. And it wants to continue breaking the law. And that's why these Wall Street banks fought so hard to get the current head of the Fed reappointed, because they know that he's going to do what Geithner did under the Obama administration. He's loyal to the New York City banks, and he's willing to sacrifice the economy to help the banks, because those are the clients of the New York Fed, the big New York banks. And that's been the case ever since I was on Wall Street half a year ago. And Pam is trying to expose how these banks are crooked, and really what the whole problem was. She points out that the Fed's supposed to make short-term loans, but these are long-term loans, and the banks are not structurally insolvent without them. They would have lost money. The FDIC could have come in and taken them over, and the depositors, the insured depositors, would have been okay, which is just exactly what Sheila Bair, who was head of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, wanted to do under Obama when she was caught by Geithner. She sat with Geithner and Obama, and he said, look, I'm backed by the banks. Forget the voters. Banks are my campaign contributors. And he bailed out the banks and pushed the whole economy into what is now a 12-year recession, basically, that is not improving at all. So what's happening now is part of...
Okay, so I think you got a gist of what they're saying happened, which is, again, basically there was the banks screwed up again. They did, speculation, and lost a lot of money, and they got secretly bailed out. And not only secretly, but illegally. They broke the Dodd-Frank law by the way they were giving money to specific banks, which they're not allowed to do except in specific circumstances, which were not meant by what happened in this case. So, I mean, again, that's plenty for you guys. Actually, I'm going to have to give my brother a call for something, so I'll go mute and you guys discuss amongst yourselves your thoughts on, well, what this says about, I think, our financial system, which is, again, how completely corrupt it is. And I think it presages that, it's inevitable that we're going to have another massive financial crisis within a decade or so. And that may be the end of, you're muted, Ken. So I think that might be the end of the capitalist system that Dennis talks about. But again, you guys discuss. So maybe, Steve, you want to jump in with your thoughts on what this means for the capitalist system, or Dennis might have some thoughts.
Dennis, you want to unmute? I mean, this is really your cup of tea. I have a few things to say about it. I mean, banking, of course, is one of the central elements of capitalism. Banks were invented, well, they were invented during the Renaissance, but the modern function, the modern role for banks began to be developed during the development of the first capitalist country, which was, of course, Holland in the 17th century, which developed mercantile capitalism. And they needed the kinds of institutions that banks became and banks are in order to help them fund their ventures. And then, so banks have played a larger and larger role. Many corporations, major corporations, to this very day cannot exist without capital that is supplied to them by banks. What's very interesting to me about this story is that these banks seem to have no shame. they were caught with literally with their pants down in 2008. They were bailed out by the federal government. The law, the Dodd-Frank was passed. It was not as strong and rigorous, certainly, as some of us. I'm not an expert in this area, but I know progressives wanted it to be stronger. And then apparently they've gone and done it again. But I think it's important that that Alex mentioned that in this era, this problem with the banks can be traced back to the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which was one of the last major actions of the Clinton administration. Glass-Steagall had been probably most people listening to this program know this, but I'll just repeat it anyway. Glass-Steagall was an act that was passed in 1934 during the Good Deal, during the New Deal, in order to prevent banks from gambling. That banks always gamble when they make loans, but that's a different kind of gambling than gambling in the stock market. Because when banks make loans, presumably they have security for their loans, presumably. But Clinton and I forget his name. He's still Larry Summers. For some reasons that I actually had never understood, wanted to get rid of Glass-Steagall, which they did, and that led directly to the financial crisis of 2008. And even though but Glass-Steagall was not reenacted. Dodd-Frank created some other rules and regulations for banks to follow, but apparently not good enough to prevent this current crisis from returning. So, and actually, it's only Dennis, and Dennis, you're the only one who's unmuted right now. Do you have anything to add to this?
Well, we have right now a crisis of the capitalist system. It's been a crisis for a long time, a structural crisis. The late Ispan Mazaros actually detected the structural crisis in 1967. Others have seen it in the beginning of the 70s, but we are in a structural crisis. The thing about
what do you mean? What do you mean by structural crisis, Dennis?
It means that there's no way out. Like the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was a way out. World War II. You can't have the war that'll blow up everything and need to rebuild. Because a war, I mean, a world war, in today's day and age, I mean, ever since the atomic weapons, will end up in nuclear winter. Or at least that's what the power brokers think. And they can't, in other words, you can't do what you did to get out of the Great Depression. So you're stuck in a situation that is irreconcilable. And that's where we are right now, in an irreconcilable problem. But the point is that if you want to know what will happen after capitalism, it may just be an extended period of stagnation, and maybe way past our lifetimes, it won't change. The problem is global warming. We really need to change the system to stop capitalist production, which is really the problem that we face as a critical problem for mankind or humankind. And it's like we're in the middle of a situation that cannot be resolved inside the capitalist system. And at the same time, we don't have the forces together to make a socialist revolution. And our job probably is to build the movements, the Mass Party, and the New International, which will allow us to fight back against capitalism, or the capital system, as Ismail Mazaros has called it, after Karl Marx, who just called it the capital, or the capital system. And this is one of those periods that you have to build the revolutionary structure to transform the system into something else, namely some sort of socialism. But if you don't have the structure, if you don't have a mass part, we have a lot of sectarian parties on the left, but none of them are the key mass party like the Communist Party was in the 1930s, or the Socialist Party in the 1930s and earlier even. You're in trouble. You can't have a revolution without a mass political party that is dedicated to the revolution, and you can't have the mass party that is dedicated to the revolution without a movement, namely in the streets outside the electoral system. We need the. I mean, to put it clearly, we don't have the subjective awareness of the American people is ill-suited for revolution, and that when we desperately need a revolution to solve global warming, that's how I see it. And I think I'll just leave it there. I think we have a series of double binds that we're dealing with. And to break out of it, you need to organize the people and change their consciousness. What you call the subjective part of what people think about all the time is not revolution at all. They think nothing can change. Most people, I would say, but everything's changed. But the funny part of it is that everything's changing all the time, and especially now. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I know a lot about this because I'm a billionaire. So I can tell you, stop making fun of these guys who are stealing money out of your pockets. They got to buy those yachts and go out to fancy dinners. Shouldn't be too critical about them. I don't know anything about this finance stuff at all. Oh, I do have news for everybody. This is good news. The federal government is issuing, wait a second, I got to try and let Mike in. There we go. I admit Mike. Let's see what happens. So the federal government has a thing called I-bonds, okay? And you get the I-bond, and they might give you 0.5% interest. But then they have, every 6 months, they put an adjustment, okay? So right now, the adjustment is like 7.25% because of inflation. And if you buy an I-bond, you'll get 7.5% interest at least until, I think, November, or it does it maybe till July. They change it every 6 months. But right now, it's 7.5%. That's pretty good. So look into it. And you just go to Treasury, or just Google I-bonds. It isn't that hard to find it. That's a tip. You know, just like these other tips. You better get $6,000 from the federal government for your education, and you know, get the stimulus stuff. I don't understand what's going on. I just think that the more money the government spends, the more it's going to boost inflation because they're just printing it. But what the banks are doing is the same thing. The money that the government, that the Fed gave to the banks that you were talking about in that article, they just printed it. Oh, they didn't even have to print it. They just wrote it down. Probably just a wire transfer, you know. This bank now has that much money that they can lend. It's got nothing to do with paper money, you know. It's a Wizard of Oz.
Oh, well, we got Mike back.
Well,
Mike.
I don't know.
Where's Mike?
Oh, we do have
I don't
Mike
see
back.
Mike. I don't even see his name.
I see him.
He's back.
Mike, you want to comment about the banks, evil banks?
He may not. He may not be able to unmute. We'll see what happens. We asked him to unmute. He was having some trouble. I was on the phone with him. So we'll see if he came back in and if he's back in. But it's maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe he's only going to be able to watch.
All right. Well, Mike will want to talk about this next story.
What's that?
It's a military history story. Well, in fact, all of you guys may find this interesting, which is here. Do you know this?
What is it?
There were nuclear weapons flowing around with the British back in 1988, 1982, when they were invading the Falkland. They had their naval task force had 31 nuclear mines aboard. And so if one of those ships had gone down, you could have had a catastrophic nuclear event in the South. Well, again, it wouldn't have affected too many people in the South Atlantic, but Prince Andrew, who was flying on one of the ships, HMS Invincible, that had Hermes had 18 nuclear weapons, he could have been irradiated. And in fact, they were very lucky. The HMS Sheffield, which, as Mike can tell you, was hit and sunk by an Argentinian fighters in the Falklands War. They asked, well, did it have any nukes aboard? And fortunately, it did not. But that could have been a complete disaster. And in fact, the Navy was told, well, hey, you could offload all those nuclear weapons at Ascension Island, which is on the way here. You could have unloaded all this so that they wouldn't have been in the area. But the Navy didn't want to do that because they thought maybe they would use them against Argentina, even though, of course, Argentina didn't have any nuclear weapons. But I guess the Royal Navy is stupid, and they wanted, again, to be able, I don't know, to threaten them with nukes if they were losing or something. But this is, shows the insanity of our nuclear, well, not just U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapon policy, but, other powers like the United Kingdom in this case. And Mike, I know you may have some, I don't know if you heard about this, but I wonder what your thoughts, comments are on this.
Well, I really
but it looks like Mike is having trouble unmuting.
Yeah, he may not be able to unmute himself. So I wouldn't try teasing him on that.
So again, there could have been, a nuclear cloud emanating from somewhere here if one of those ships had been sunk, and
you said nuclear.
There'd been a release of
Did you say nuclear mines? M-I-N-E?
Mines, yes, they're designed to be used against subs.
Oh,
but it's so again, it's not even like they could have nuked Buenos Aires, fortunately. But why the hell they felt that they needed to carry them around is, well, it's really just, it's that stupid military mentality where they want all their options, even if they're very dumb ones. I mean, really, you're going to use nukes against Argentina in 1982?
I mean, but just the idea of using a nuclear weapon against a submarine, I mean, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
That's, gee whiz. I mean, doesn't anybody think about the contamination?
Yeah, well, obviously not.
If you drop a nuke on land, of course there's contamination in a certain limited geographic area. But if you explode a nuclear weapon underwater, there's nothing to stop the nuclear particles from circulating possibly all around the world. I mean, it's just, wow.
Yeah. And I think we have Mike. Can you? I think we have Mike unmuted. So
No, I don't know. I don't think he's unmuted.
it's looking like he's unmuted. Mike, can you say
I
anything?
know,
Or
but he can't.
all right. Well, Dennis, then you're well.
We know what Dennis is going to say. So
I mean,
no.
Just a question, since you guys are old enough, and I don't know your background on this stuff. Were any of you guys involved in the nuclear freeze movement back in the 70s and 80s? I'm curious.
Yeah, I was.
You, Dennis? You go to any of those demonstrations, the big one in Central Park that they had? And
the demonstrations are just places you go to meet women.
Why is that how you met? Is that how you met your wife, Ken? Is that what you want to tell us?
More or less. But there's all kinds of accidents and near misses at nuclear facilities. People on drugs,
There's
there. I
had a nuclear bomb buried somewhere under Greenland still.
Yeah, I have.
There are two off the coast of Spain that one of our B-52s dropped. There's one in like the swamps of North Carolina that almost went off.
Yeah.
They're the closest we've ever come to an actual, basically back in I think 62, before the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was an accident with a B-52 over North Carolina, and one of the nuclear weapons, which was a 3 megaton bomb, separated from the aircraft, and the way it came out, it actually it armed the bomb almost all the way, and the only thing that kept it from detonating when it reached, the height it was supposed to go off, was that one switch was on, or if it had been switched to the other side, you would have had a 3 megaton explosion over the middle of North Carolina.
3 megaton.
In 1862. Sorry, in 1962.
Well, 1862 it would have been okay.
Yeah, no, 1962. Kennedy. The country would have been, completely changed, obviously, and maybe you would have gotten nuclear disarmament. But we came very close to basically, Then there's the Damascus incident in Arkansas, where a nuclear, a Thor missile cooked off, and the nuclear warhead got thrown outside it. And when Bill Clinton was governor, this was under Carter, and that also came. It could have, if things. Because there could have been a catastrophic release of nuclear material, because there was a fire in the silo and it could have burned through the warhead, and essentially, all the tritium and uranium would have been sprayed around when it blew up. So.
Right, and then we had all of that.
And that's not to count all the stuff the Soviets have.
Yeah, the Soviets, when they broke apart the USSR, there were a lot of nukes in the Ukraine and in Georgia, right? And it's a question.
Not Georgia, Kazakhstan and Belarus had. Those were the countries that had.
And so you want to find out if those more diminutive governments have enough authority and discipline to take care of them, because they're high overhead maintenance and security.
Right. Not to mention, remember South Africa. Well, here's an interesting, going through some stuff about South Africa, and of course they had 6 nuclear weapons under the apartheid regime, but they got rid of them before. It's an interesting question, they got rid of them before Mandela came to power. So it's an interesting question whether that was simple racism, that they didn't want, they didn't give the ANC, they didn't give Mandela the chance to decide whether he wanted to get rid of them. And a lot of people think that's because they didn't want a black country to have nuclear weapons, just like they don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons because they're Muslim. Of course, there's an exception of Pakistan there. And of course, India, Israel, Pakistan have nukes. I think the French have had an accident or two as well. I know about the British. I haven't heard anything, but I haven't researched. I know, the U.S. and the USSR have had, again, several major nuclear accidents. And that's, again, just nuclear weapons, not, nuclear power plants, which of course, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, etc.
And Fukushima.
Right, yeah.
So, nuclear is a big threat. And there you go, historically. So that's one up on the British. But it didn't happen, right? So that's good.
Well, it's too bad Mike can't come because I'm sure he must have something to say. But
oh, he must be dying. He's dying.
Yes. Or if Frank were here. Well, Frank would probably defend Thatcher. If you read down in the story, apparently Thatcher considered giving sovereignty for the Falklands over to the Argentinians in the early, when she came to power, but with the understanding that there would be a 99-year lease like Hong Kong that would allow the British to keep them for, again, another 99 years. So if they had done that, they might have completely avoided the entire war. Not that, you can still blame the Argentinian junta was, they had their own reasons to do it. And that's probably the one good thing Thatcher ever did, to defeat them, and then they were overthrown in '83. And so, because the Argentinian junta was horrific, killed 30,000 of their own people. They were the people who were tossing dissidents out of helicopters and disappearing people. So they're not a nice group of people, but again, the unfortunate thing is it helped Thatcher get reelected into, otherwise we would have avoided a lot of evil in Britain in terms of neoliberalism and all that. No, which I'm sure Dennis has some things to say about.
I would like to bring up a whole different topic that's in the financial area. I did have something for that. So let me just pull this thing up here and see what happens. And here we go. So now it's on this. This is just a document from a very good website. But you see, the point of this is GDP 2021. I don't think I can make it larger. Let me see what happens. Oh, that's larger, isn't it? So here, the GDP serves as a barometer for the country's economic health. It measures the total market value of final goods and services produced in a country during a given year. Together, the U.S. and China account for 42% of the global GDP. Here's the GDP by country according to the International Monetary Fund estimates. Now, the point of this is that instead of talking about, this is pragmatic. GDP is not everything. There's military, there's religion, there's song and dance, there's empathy, there's charity, there's all kinds of things in life. But this is GDP, so it shows who's got the muscle financially in an economic situation. And this is of interest in seeing the relative position currently of major powers around the world that you wouldn't think. Here's the U.S., there's Germany, France. Look at France and Germany, pretty big. And China, is about 3 times bigger
and those,
than Germany.
Ken, those aren't the real numbers, though, because they don't take into account purchasing parity.
Come on. Whatever the real numbers are, these are numbers.
Yeah.
You can't just throw this out.
But this is skewed by, consumer prices.
That's right. And, and when I measure your height, I got to see whether you're wearing shoes and socks. I understand there might be finesse to this, but look.
Oh, no, it's not, because
this shows the ratio. It's the
because if you look at this, I can bring up the CIA numbers for purchasing power parity, which again takes into account the different, the cost, what's the real cost, what the purchasing power of a particular country is. That puts China well ahead of the U.S. It also pushes Russia pretty up past France and Brazil, but it's interesting because it's different. It also India is pushed quite a bit higher because again, obviously their costs are much less than other countries.
Okay, so you're talking about money in the bank, assets.
Well, no, this is GDP, but again,
this is GDP, but you're talking about assets. How much they have in balance?
No. It's the same kind of. It's just
purchasing power.
It's determined by purchasing power. Again,
what's the difference? What is purchasing power mean?
It's corrected for the exchange rate and the value. So
why
currency,
do you think this isn't?
Well, because here I can show you here. Because look at this you got to stop sharing yours. And I'll show you the CIA number, purchasing power. You can see again they're very different. They according to the CIA numbers, China's GDP is 23 trillion, and the U.S. is only 19.8 trillion. So that flips the numbers again because of the different exchange rates. It has India is increased to 8.4 trillion. And let's see, fourth is Japan, 5.2 trillion, then Germany, 4.3 trillion, Russia, 3.8 trillion, Indonesia, 3.1 trillion, Brazil, 2.9 trillion, France, 2.8, Britain, 2.7, Turkey, 2.3, Italy, 2.3.
All right, you're reading off numbers. The point is...
Well, I can put the chart up if you
Okay, I will. I will put it up in a second. The point is this. It's not the numbers. It's the relationship of the size. Now, this is a reflection of what the countries or the regions produce in exchangeable commodities.
Goods, yeah.
Goods and services, right? Whether or not they're in a balanced trade or who's got more assets or purchasing power, this is how they're producing in terms of recognized goods and services that are considered as GDP. Okay, so it shows, to me, it's showing, here's Saudi Arabia and Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, and it's little guys here.
Yeah.
And as
and all these figures
Denmark
again,
and UK,
they include fictitious profits too. In terms of, they include speculation, like if somebody drives up the price of Tesla, and it goes up 100% in a year as it has done. That's not, Tesla's not producing 100% more cars. It's not adding 100% real value. That's just the value of its stock, and that's counted towards GDP. And things like stock buybacks, again, where, companies buy their own stock and increase the value.
Okay, so I'm going to take this down. You're going to put up your CIA thing. I didn't know you were working for them. Let's see.
Well, they do their...
Go ahead.
It's not good. You got to figure it's correct.
Come on.
It doesn't look good for us.
No excuses. Come on.
Oh. So
what are U.S. is way up there.
So they pushed it, but China's above us. But it also, again, here, people will say, oh, Russia is such a tiny economy. Not with purchasing power. Again, it becomes the number 6 economy in the world. And also, again, India pushes past Japan and Germany to be the number 3 economy, and they're obviously rising. Turkey's also considered. Brazil and Indonesia are pushed up by this.
So what's the difference between purchasing
power?
Here,
okay, definition. A nation's GDP at purchasing power parity. Exchange rates is the sum of value of all goods and services provided in the country valued at prices prevailing in the United States. So it's like, okay, if you were selling that good for the same price, the price that you would get in the United States, do that multiplier, and that increase, So if gas is at, $1 a barrel in China versus $3 a barrel, you would multiply that by 3 and again, and you do that with every commodity, every good, and that's how you figure out purchasing power, by those multipliers. So that, again, countries that have a lower cost of living are boosted by that again. While still, again, you still have to make and sell stuff, but here again, you can see again, even Egypt is a pretty big economy. With these Saudis, again, obviously that's their oil, but here, Mike, Canada does pretty well here, but South Korea, Mexico, though, also gets a thing of, and Turkey. So again, global South countries get a boost. We can see here, Iran turns out to be a pretty decently large economy and bigger than Pakistan, despite all the sanctions, if you do purchasing power. Right down here.
Just in terms of English, it's, I think what you read up there said, if we convert it all to U.S. dollars, that's purchasing power.
Yeah.
So this shows their value, their GDP converted to dollars based on the exchange rate between the two countries.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And the other chart just showed how did
Just
they
shows
do it?
without accounting for the exchange rate. Yeah. Which
Well, I don't know how they, how can they do
that inflates the GDP of Western countries basically, and suppresses it for the rest of the world essentially that has lower cost of living.
Okay.
Essentially, this is a better indication of what the real economy size is.
Okay.
And and again, as I said, the GDP anyway. Again, it includes a lot of trickery. Again, from like the financial industry, which doesn't, is more of a parasite than actually contributing to the economy.
Okay,
Again,
so-
stock buybacks increase GDP, which is complete nonsense. And again, that's not actually, you're not actually making more goods or selling more things. That's just an accounting trick, basically. But
Right.
that gets counted towards increasing GDP, things like that.
But would it be counted?
Or if the real estate value goes up,
Would it be counted here too?
Yeah. Again, then changed by the exchange rate.
When China builds ghost cities.
Right? Yeah, exactly. That's counted. Yeah,
that's counted, right? There's nobody living in it.
Because that's although to some extent it is, because they're actually at least building something. They're actually putting people to work. They're paying wages, so it's not it's not totally wasted in that sense. But yeah.
Okay, so what do you get from this? We're looking at this.
Well, that China has passed us already. So, they're going to pass us in the other GDP consideration by the end of the decade anyway. So, and they'll be, by like 2030, they'll be like twice this, by purchasing power, they'll be, I think, something like 2 to 2.5 times the size of our economy. China will be. So, at the current differing rates of growth. So.
That's correct.
And again, that's assuming that there, as is likely to happen, there isn't another major financial crisis in the U.S. to, depress our economy in the West for a while. So.
Okay, so in that regard, I'd like to pull up
Sure.
a thing about China in South America, which we've never really talked about, right?
Not specifically, no. But we've talked about China in general. Sure.
Let me see. There it is. Well, let's go with a YouTube video. In just a second, let me get to that. And then that's showing there. So then all I have to do is come here and share it. And there it is. And we boost it up and we start.
Oh, we're not hearing it, Ken. You got it.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
You got to share sound or something.
Okay, great. 1 second, and then I'll start it over. Yeah, you're right. I didn't do that. I'm always telling you. I'm always bothering you about that, right? Let me make sure it's stereo. Okay. So let me put it back because the guy's got a very sweet voice. There we go.
Yeah, David Strather, the actor. So.
All over the Western Hemisphere, in Chile and Panama, in Ecuador and Argentina.
Who is this from, Ken? Do you know?
Its presence felt.
I'll tell you
Until
later.
recently, China had little interest in Latin America. Now, its investment is transforming the region. Great Decisions investigates this new phenomenon, as well as the challenges it has brought. Rising levels of debt, worries about creeping authoritarianism, and the prospect of direct competition with the United States. Competing for influence, China in Latin America. Next on Great Decisions.
Great Decisions is produced by the Foreign Policy Association in association with Thomson Reuters. Funding for Great Decisions is provided by PricewaterhouseCoopers, LLP. And the Nelson B.
So this is like a 4 CFR kind of
Right.
group. Yeah.
I'll speed it up.
Yeah. Because it's going to be long.
It's not
In
that
June
long, is it?
2017,
No.
Panama.
Well, if you play the whole thing, it's
bombshell
26
announcement.
minutes.
Panama would become just the second nation in Central America to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China.
Today, Panama breaks its diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
A world that is connected, that is globalized, where cooperation amongst countries is necessary to achieve development and to really advance. It's necessary to be connected to such a large.
Costco.
It was a decision that caught the U.S. State Department unawares.
It came as quite a surprise to the United States.
Because you're an idiot.
The president, Juan Carlos Varela, he had been publicly supportive of switching recognition. We were surprised more at the timing and, frankly, at the fact that there wasn't any pre-consultation. I was not made aware of it until literally about an hour before the president went on television and announced it.
Of course, I did not inform John right when we were about to sign. He's right about that, and it's our sovereign right to do so. And we decided to do it that way on purpose, because we knew that it would be very hard to have it done otherwise. I think a country like mine can be mature and understand the challenges and the advantages to my country on dealing with different countries.
This is about a step forward in a more assertive foreign policy for the Dominican Republic.
Over the next 14 months, two other countries, the Dominican Republic and El Salvador, followed Panama's lead.
We are convinced that this is the correct path that will lead to the development of mutually beneficial links for our two peoples.
In the recent period, China has been putting a lot more pressure on countries that are diplomatically aligned with Taiwan to switch, and they have a lot of leverage to bring to bear on different governments.
Interestingly enough, some of these countries would have done this earlier, but it was China that told them to hold off. But once there was an election in Taiwan and the pro-independence party won, well, all bets were off.
China's bid for recognition in Latin America reflects a new priority for a country whose main focus, under the auspices of the Belt and Road Initiative, has long been in Asia and Africa.
We've seen China expand the Belt and Road Initiative to the Latin American region. It's been something that's focused more extensively on Asia and Europe and Northern Africa to a degree, but has become increasingly global over the years.
In several of the Chinese government's statements, Latin America is included as a part of the Belt and Road. We have seen a lot of activities Beijing is doing in Latin America.
Now, with President Trump determined to check China's growth, Latin America has turned into an unexpected battlefield.
Make no mistake about it, China's doing it for its own interest. They want the markets that they create to play according to the Chinese rule, which is a government-run system, not an open market economy. They also are using these avenues for their national security purposes, including stealing intellectual property and jeopardizing our national security.
I think China's involvement in Latin America is an economic threat. I'm from Florida. Our biggest trading partners are generally South and Central America. This is a clear competitor to the United States in our backyard. There's no question they're not our friend.
China's interest in Latin America ramped up in the early 2000s, when the so-called pink tide brought leftist governments to power throughout the region.
Traditionally, the Chinese have focused more on countries like Venezuela and Ecuador, and these are countries that in China are regarded as leftist. So there was a natural political linkage there.
There was a member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo in China, a man by the name of Li Changchun, who first traveled to Venezuela, struck a friendship with Hugo Chavez, thought it was a good idea for China to make inroads in Venezuela. He found an ideological sympathy with Hugo Chavez, so they started going in with all these loans for Venezuelan infrastructure.
The Chinese have been extremely sophisticated in cultivating Ecuadorians. Years ago, when I was the U.S. ambassador there, they sent a Chinese ambassador who was a charming, talented woman, spoke impeccable Spanish. Immediately set about getting to know Ecuadorians, organized and funded trips for the president of Ecuador and cabinet to go to China.
Gradually, China's attention has expanded to the entire region. Beijing now bankrolls massive infrastructure projects in dozens of Latin American countries, especially in the transportation and energy sectors.
The big story with the Belt and Road Initiative has been infrastructure building, which obviously takes a lot of capital, which a lot of the governments in Latin America are short on, and traditional commercially oriented financing structures aren't so interested in because they see it as risky.
Countries like Panama that offer diplomatic recognition to Beijing can expect a windfall of Chinese investment.
Shortly after Panama reestablished diplomatic ties with Beijing, President Xi visited, and that was a very productive meeting. There were nearly 18 agreements that were signed on a whole range of issues, including infrastructure and connectivity.
A Chinese company won the tender for building the fourth bridge of the Panama Canal. That's a $1.4 billion project. Panama is being built up by China into its main logistics and transport hub in the Americas.
There were no deals on the table for Panama's establishment of relations with China. And I think this is very important to be highlighted because other countries have done it differently. Other countries have established relations with China in exchange for large infrastructure projects or investments.
Often, Beijing has been willing to provide funding for large-scale projects that Western creditors have declined to support.
One of the most emblematic projects of the Belt and Road Initiative in the Latin American region is the Belgrano Cargus rail expansion in Argentina. This is a project that the Argentines have wanted to do for a very, very long time. It requires billions in finance, and very few have been interested in supporting this project financially. China has.
This is a very important railway that crosses the agricultural heartland of Argentina. And it is as much in China's interest as it is in Argentina's interest to modernize this railway. This railway transports materials that are essential for China: soy, wheat, corn, flour.
Chinese loans require the use of Chinese companies and of Chinese equipment. Argentina happens to produce a lot of the things that would be required to build a railway. But the loan conditions were such that they required the importation of Chinese equipment fully across the board, which was detrimental, I think, to local industry.
Not all of China's investments in Latin America have paid off. American politicians are quick to highlight examples of shoddy or unnecessary construction.
You saw this quite clearly here in the region at the Coca-Cola-Sinclair Dam in the jungles of Ecuador. The dam now runs to half capacity. The steel used to make it is full of cracks. There are accidents. Nearly every top official that was involved in the dam's construction is either imprisoned or sentenced on bribery charges.
When the projects are not good projects, they're stranded capital, then they want the country to pay them back, and the country said, wait, this thing doesn't work, I don't need it.
But Latin American observers, particularly those from the region's strongest economies, say that doing business with China is simply a necessity.
China has become the major partner, trade partner with Brazil. China has also become important as a source of capital flows. They are new investors in areas such as high-tech, fintech, and banks.
Our countries are going through a very difficult moment. Growth this year will be absolutely minimal. Now, the way to deal with that is to associate yourself with the part of the world that are growing at high rate.
One problem for Latin American countries that rely on Chinese capital is the risk of racking up debts they cannot possibly repay.
That's appealing if you are the leader of a nation that is poor, that needs money, and the Chinese come in and say, we'll give you a soft loan. You're focused on today. You're not focused on what's going to happen 10 years out when those loans come due.
Members of the Trump administration have repeatedly accused China of pursuing debt-trap diplomacy with the goal of gaining political influence.
Let me say with great respect to all the nations across this wider region in the world, do not accept foreign debt that could compromise your sovereignty. Protect your interests.
Except if it's American debt, then pile it on.
It suggests intention. It suggests that this is a premeditated scheme that China had sought out before it reached out to recipient countries. And that is a narrative that I personally do not agree with.
That leads me to the question that is often posed, whether China practices so-called debt diplomacy. Some people say that China purposefully lends money to countries to get them into debt and then take over their assets. It wouldn't be a very wise diplomatic strategy.
When countries struggle to pay back their debts in cash, China collects it in other forms.
Part of the lending to Venezuela, for instance, it comes with a collateral. If Venezuela is not capable of paying back, China has a right to repay in oil.
Ecuador has huge, huge debts to China in terms of the oil it must pay them. 80 to 90% of all of their production is due to China over the next 5 to 10 years.
Even in oil-rich countries, however, China's investments can be risky.
Chinese oil investment in Venezuela now is regarded as not only a debt trap for Venezuela, but also a trap for China as a lender, because Venezuela domestic politics turned south, and the government is unable to repay the loans that it took from China.
China continues to offer financing to Venezuela, but in lesser amounts than we've seen in previous years. So everything is about sort of maintaining the status quo, a degree of stability, and trying to ensure that enough oil is being produced to be able to pay things back.
So at some point, these countries will come to the conclusion that, as they say, if you owe the bank $100, you have a problem. If you owe the bank $1 billion, the bank has a problem. So in this case, maybe China has a problem.
As Beijing invests more and more heavily in Latin America, it is inevitably drawn into political controversies in the Western Hemisphere, including ones that China's leaders would prefer to avoid.
China has always maintained this policy of non-interference in the domestic affairs of sovereign nations. But as China's footprint grows globally, whether in Latin America or other regions, inevitably China will be dragged into some political issues.
China wanted to host a meeting of the Inter-American Development Bank in China. But there's a delicate issue, which is that most IDB members recognize Juan Guaido as a legitimate president of Venezuela. So the IDB countries say, well, if you want to host us, fine, we'll come. Just make sure you invite the person we consider to be the legitimate president. At the end of the day, China ended up canceling the meeting. So that's what happens with China in Latin America. They usually stumble unnecessarily into these situations.
One major project that has done little to enhance China's reputation is a secretive satellite tracking station in Argentina, which has left many locals confused and frustrated.
In 2014, China and Argentina signed an agreement permitting China to build a space station in the Neuquén region in Patagonia in Argentina. The space station is staffed nearly exclusively by Chinese nationals.
I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of the Chinese is here.
The Chinese haven't done anything here. They haven't left behind anything of value.
China has consistently maintained that the space station is purely for peaceful purposes. However, the space station is managed by an agency that has very close ties to the People's Liberation Army, China's military, which has raised concerns in the US and elsewhere about whether the space station has a dual use.
If there is so much security, they are protecting or want to investigate something. No, an observatory does not need that many guards just to see the moon.
Officials within the Trump administration have responded to China's growing presence in Latin America by citing the Monroe Doctrine, a declaration from 1823 that warned European countries not to interfere in the Western Hemisphere.
A few years back, during the Obama administration, John Kerry, then Secretary of State, gave a speech in which he sought partnership-based relations with Latin America, genuine partnerships.
The relationship that we seek and that we have worked hard to foster is not about a United States declaration about how and when it will intervene in the affairs of other American states. The era of the Monroe Doctrine is over.
It was a good line in a speech. It got some applause. And then, I think mostly for rhetorical purposes, obviously, and the Trump administration, National Security Advisor Bolton brought it back.
Today, we proudly proclaim for all to hear, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well.
The Monroe Doctrine started as a way of saying we are rejecting foreign interference in our hemisphere. It came to be interpreted in the hemisphere as the U.S. will tell the governments of this region what to do.
The Monroe Doctrine has always been very offensive to Latin American countries. We have never quite agreed and been happy with the Monroe Doctrine. It's not something that Latin American countries look up to.
I don't know that we could enforce it maybe the way President Monroe could back then, but as a matter of principle and hemispheric solidarity, I think that the fact that now that we have more Latin American countries agreeing with the United States about China is kind of a non-militaristic reflection of the Monroe Doctrine's principles.
In April 2019, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo traveled to Santiago, Chile, where he laid out the Trump administration's case for why Latin American countries...
And you should wind it up, unless you want to play the whole thing.
The basic message the Secretary of State...
So, yeah, 20 minutes.
...was that trading
let's cut it down.
Doing business with China.
I think we don't have to play these all the
time. Yeah, we get the idea.
We get it.
Because I find these things funny, because it's, well...
Well, I mean,
Once the IMF does the same thing, they never...
even your favorite uncle farts. So you can always attack any country anytime you want for something they're doing that's wrong or hypocritical.
And again, well, as I said, the words IMF,
I mean, the first thing you said is it's not okay because U.S. does it too. That's not the point. The point is there's China, there's the U.S., there's Europe. What's going on?
The point is, even if China and the U.S. both do it, it's a good thing because then that gives the countries, they can compete and they can get a better deal because they have, they can go to the other one. They can play them against each other and get a better deal for themselves.
Maybe it is, but maybe it leads to exploitation of resources, which is
I'm going to cut in here, guys.
Hey, Mike.
Finally made it, Mike.
Hey, Mike, we missed you.
I'm back temporarily.
Let's go, Mike.
And I think it's also would be good. I know you, Ken and Alex, you guys want to debate each other. But you might want to
that's not good. Let's get to the news, guys. Go ahead.
Just for the hell of it,
What do you think, Mike?
About
China and Latin America.
Yeah, China's in Latin America. Again, breaking news. First of all, that story is obviously old. But yeah. So what? We know they're in Latin America. As far as, you know, we bring back the Monroe Doctrine, which is ridiculous, but we're just going to have to compete. However, I will say this much about China. China is not necessarily bringing employment to a lot of these countries because they're bringing their own people in, take care of it. They're running it themselves. There's a certain logic to that, especially if there's a security issue there. But pretty soon, countries are going to say, hey, they're no better than the United States. As a matter of fact, they may be worse because they're not even creating, I mean, they may not be overthrowing democracies, but they're just basically parasiting on in these countries. I'm saying in the perception of a lot of the people there, because they're investing there, but they're not bringing in jobs. They're bringing in their own people. They're taking more out than they're bringing in, far more out than they're bringing in. I'm not saying any other power, the United States or Russia or anything like that, wouldn't do that, but I think people are going to start, you know, in those countries, going to start getting fed up with China.
So let's go to Steve. You always have a different viewpoint on it.
Thanks, Ken. Well, it's one thing that apparently the Chinese have not done as they have expanded around the world is to create a very large chain of military bases. You know, we know that the United States has somewhere between 700 and 800 military bases around the world, large and small. The Chinese don't seem to have done that. Certainly, there was nothing in this film that indicated that that the Chinese had done that. That would, you know, imply that the Chinese are engaging in this large number of diplomatic initiatives, particularly in Latin America, both to increase trade and also to increase access to natural resources. You know, I think particularly in Latin America, given the history of the United States involvement in Latin America, usually on the side of repressive governments, that the Chinese are going to have an economic advantage over us, particularly if they don't get involved in the politics. And I certainly don't know enough about what's going on with China in the individual countries, say in Latin America, in terms of their politics to say whether they're doing that or not. In terms of military bases, this is a region we were talking about either 1 or 2 weeks ago, and that's Eastern Africa. That apparently the Chinese have established their first overseas military base in Djibouti, which is in a very, it's located at the entrance to the Red Sea. So it is a very strategically located part of Africa. And China is building maybe already built a military base there. I don't know that anybody knows why China has chosen that particular location for a military base. Whereas China,
it helps with the anti-piracy operations they do.
Oh, is that what it is?
Somalia, yeah, that's what it's for. Yeah.
Oh well, that's an activity that benefits everybody.
Right.
You know, so it's very interesting to see China expand around the world. We all know I'm sure that everybody on this program knows the story about how at the end of the 15th century, China had assembled the largest naval fleet that the world had ever seen, not only in number of ships, but also they apparently were really
size,
and driven by sail. I mean, the engineering, you can just imagine what the engineering must have been, and the engineering ability must have been to take very large vessels that were able to be pushed by sail and also maneuver. and there was it was an empire with one person at the top, and he had the final say, and he decided that he did not want China expanding around the world, and they literally they destroyed the fleet. Isn't that right, Alex?
Yeah. The main here, actually, let me put it up. I have a computer render. They were bigger than the Nina, the Pinto. By
yeah.
It's like this is what one of those look like.
Yeah, they were enormous.
Again, multi-sail. They're junks. Yeah. So here's a comparison. So that's like a typical Spanish caravel of the Nita Santa. So this is the comparison. So you can see they weren't as maneuverable. Again, that's the Western ships did have that advantage, and but obviously
anyway,
the amount of goods they could carry and people. I mean, literally. They brought in elephants from Africa, and so rhinos back to China and things like that.
Yeah.
Oh, here's these guys actually recreated one of them.
Oh my gosh! Look at that.
Oh yeah.
So given that, and I had forgotten you. Thank you for adding that important fact that the base in Djibouti is anti-piracy and actually benefits everybody. So the Chinese are not attempting to build a military, I don't know whether you want to call it an empire or not, but certainly a chain of military bases around the world like this country is, that they're, engaging in classic investment and also extraction of resources without having to take the country over, which the Western powers always did when they did that in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And they did it to China too in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Right, and China has done, is controlling Tibet and controlling that western, to them it's the western province where the Uyghurs live. I never can pronounce it. And they want to take back Taiwan, and they're taking back Hong Kong. And they're building islands. My concern is when you get, and it's all under one autocrat, Xi Jinping. He's got, I think, a 28-year term or something. They changed the constitution so he doesn't have to get reelected even by the CCP. So he's he's in charge, and he's kind of autocratic. But I'm just concerned whether it's the U.S. trying to dominate the world, and it's you think of Dick Cheney or Nixon or somebody, or whoever, Donald Rumsfeld, or Hitler, or Genghis Khan or Napoleon, where you get somebody who's like, no, I want to take over the world. We're going to conquer the world. We're going to go everywhere. It's us. We're going to be in charge, and they want to put it all out everywhere, and that includes the U.S. doing that. Like, it's so embarrassing if you go to France and you see a McDonald's restaurant. You go, oh my God, did that come from the U.S.? It's disgusting. Here you are in Paris with all this class, and there's a McDonald's. It's embarrassing. So, or in China, English, everything's written in the road signs and everything. It's in Chinese and English. Everything's in English because that's the universal language.
It's the international language.
That's the international language, right?
Yeah.
But also, the highways look like the highways in the U.S. And, all of the majority of the structures and the lifestyle and the elevators and the escalators, it's all like a Western culture. It's not even European. In European, they had these constant elevators going up, and you hop on and it goes up as it's going up. We don't see that in the States, So everything is kind of like modeled after the States. And there's a cultural imposition of American culture and European culture all over the world. T-shirts, dungarees, sandals, the whole thing. And we appropriate culture from other countries too.
Yeah, And they're all made in China, Ken.
That's right. They're all coming from China. That's exactly correct.
At least the Chinese, when they buy T-shirts, they're made in their own country. They're not made in foreign countries.
That's right. They're wearing them there too.
Yeah, if we cut off China, they'll just make them in Vietnam or
However,
Indonesia.
you actually, Ken, you actually came on to an interesting point, which is the different ways in which different types of imperialism work.
Right.
Chinese imperialism is a little short-sighted compared to U.S. and formerly British imperialism, in that in U.S. we have spread, shall we say, I put this in quotes, Americanism, or American values and American products, especially, all over the world. In other words, we try to get the people of that particular country involved in it so that Americanism becomes an international value, for better or for worse, usually for worse. Britain also did that. As a matter of fact, one rather brilliant person said that the British Empire, colonial empire, no longer exists, but the empire of ideas does. And that brilliant person was me. But anyway, just to give myself one little
somebody you know well, Mike.
Yeah, well, I know better than anybody else.
Look, that's the way all fan clubs start, you know.
Yeah.
A population of one, and it might no more than that. However, the idea is that China seems to have a less, shall we say, complementary idea, which is that
they also may be developing that. I mean, obviously they're making lots more. Chinese film industry may become more, popular worldwide, like Hollywood.
But the film industry is from Europe and America. Cinema came from Europe.
Yeah.
But America film dominated, and now there's Bollywood and Nigeria wood and everything. Yeah. But it's still all, it's still American type cameras, dramas.
Sure. Yeah.
The plots. The plots.
But the idea is the Chinese film industry.
Yeah.
As opposed to the U.S. or British or French or any other country film industry, primarily Hollywood, let's say.
Yeah.
The Chinese film industry makes films for China, but they don't keep their eye on the.
They're not making international films.
Right. Hollywood always keeps its eye on the international market.
Right.
So the idea is that China is doing something that's, shall we say, perhaps less military and less insidious in that respect. However, more self-serving and more obviously self-serving to people.
If they wind up, beating everybody on artificial intelligence,
doesn't matter.
They'll be using their stuff.
You're not going to see Chinese become the international business language. By the way, English is the international business language. But you're not going to see that happen anytime soon.
No.
Because China is
it's a difficult language for people.
Well, not only that, it's also, but China, well, look, the Israelis could probably learn it because the Israelis read in the wrong direction. But the idea is that, there's a little offensive remark on my part.
Yeah, very offensive. I mean, according to them, we read in the wrong direction. So come
exactly. On. Or Japanese.
Feel better. I think Americans drive on the wrong side of the road, and Canadians for that matter, and the French. But
I think the Japanese and the Chinese read up and down. They don't read left to right.
Well, no, it goes right to left. It does. Japanese definitely.
Okay, Ken, I want to say that when this conversation has gotten particularly intellectual, I'm going to say goodbye for the evening. Enjoyed the talk with everybody as usual.
That's fine.
And see you all next week.
Okay, Steve.
And we're putting you in. You have a ticket to get a trip to China. We're going to give that away as a prize.
Yeah, listen, I had three literally three trips to China, all of which had to be canceled. Yeah, no. I mean, it was my initiative. But I just before I leave, one very it's sort of funny story. I had made the USA Triathlon International team, which is fairly easy to make when you get old, to go to Beijing. The World Triathlon Games were in Beijing, and I think it was 2011. And I was supposed to go, and then there were a variety of reasons why I couldn't go. And the irony is, I don't race in the rain. I don't ride my bike in the rain because of the danger. And it rained on my race day. So I would have gone all the way to China and I would not have raced. So anyway, gentlemen, and yeah, maybe we'll get a lady back one of these times. See you all next week.
You talk Gail into coming on. Yeah.
Happy New Year, Steve.
Yeah.
Happy New Year to everybody. Stay safe.
Okay, very good. So anyhow, well, that's good. I just feel like it's a good thing to watch China. You know, it's a big thing that's happening and there isn't much coverage on it. And these other thing like the Turkestan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and, you know, Laurel and Hardystan or whatever other countries are out there. It's, you know, to cover some stuff that's not in the news like Epstein and Giselle, whatever her name is, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that stuff is just distraction. It's not really relevant. And, I just wanted to remind you before we leave, let me pull this up for myself here. And just, I've got to tell you this. Tomorrow is a very important day. Okay? Tomorrow is January 6th. It's the date that Joan of Arc was born. And also Samuel Morse demonstrated the telegraph in public on January 6th. And a commercial airline completed a first trip around the world on January 6th. And the figure skater Nancy Kerrigan was attacked on January 6th.
Really?
And Dizzy Gillespie and Rudolf Nureyev both passed away on January 6th. So that's the day.
An auspicious day.
Anything else happened on January 6th?
More recently, maybe. Yeah.
Some little event last year that happened on January 6th, but